Good morning, Fairfield Christian. It's Monday morning. It's time to start off the week strong. It's the second week of the second semester, and it's time for our Monday morning devotions. Now, we had no Monday morning devotions last week because we had no school on Monday last week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Psalm in general this morning as we get into the devotion as well. All right, so we're in Psalm chapter 58. This week we're adding verses 3 through 5. Last week we had verses 1 and 2. And this Psalm verses 58, we actually know a little bit about this psalm. First of all, we call it a Davidic psalm, which means it was more than likely written by King David. We also know that this psalm was sung as a song. We know that because the information right at the beginning of the psalm is for the choir director. And it tells them that they should, it says, do not destroy. And we think that that was actually a tune that this psalm was sung to. There are other psalms that are also sung to that same tune. So, we know a little bit about the psalm in general. We also know that this psalm, while we're talking about God is justice, right? We're talking about the attributes of God throughout the school year. This next few weeks we're talking about God is justice. This psalm really is a cry against injustice. And these first 5 verses, we really see a lot of injustice. That's what we're really looking at. And so it's kind of a compare and contrast sort of thing. The first 5 verses that we're talking about right here, we're looking at the way that man operates. We're looking at the way that man dispenses justice. And what it really is, it's really injustice. And then next week we'll take a look at the verses. We'll see God and see God's justice, and we'll be able to compare and contrast man's injustice with God's justice. But for this week, I want to talk a little bit about the injustice that we see in these first 5 verses. 'Cause let's face it, these first 5 verses are pretty negative. There's not a whole lot positive going on there. And that's one thing I love about the Bible, is it does not shy away from the negative. Now, if man wrote the Bible, there are a lot of things that man probably would have left out of the Bible. You know, think about the first 2 humans ever born on earth, Cain and Abel. One of them kills the other one. That's not a very good beginning to mankind here on earth. If I was writing that, I probably kind of would have left that out. But God doesn't leave anything out. He includes the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in this part that we're talking about right here in Psalm 58, we're talking about the ugliness of human nature. Man tends to be, even when they try to be just, we tend to be unjust. And that goes back, as the verses here allude to, back to our sin nature. We live in a very broken, sinful world. And because of that, it's hard for us to be just. As humans, when we try to dispense justice, we only see the perspective of one person dispensing justice to another person in general. The nice thing about God is God can see everything all at once. So God sees how one action affects not only that specific person, but how it affects all the people connected to that person. And that's why God's justice is a perfect justice. God's justice is also an eternal justice. See, we kind of think of things in the short term, right? Even if we're looking 10 to 20 years down the road, to God, that's still short term. And God is always thinking long term. What's the best thing to take place right here in this situation for the long run, for eternity? And that's what God is always thinking about, because He wants to spend eternity with us. So He always thinks about the long term, the eternal effect, how it's going to affect the kingdom of God overall, not just this one individual. And that's why God's justice is perfect and ours is definitely imperfect. Now, one thing I do want to talk about a little bit is that justice, as we kind of define what justice is not fairness. I know that's what we kind of tend to think, and that's what we really want, is for things to be fair. But if you've been in my Bible classes, you've heard me ask the question before, is it fair that I was born in America and somebody else is born in a third world country? That's not fair. And here on earth, fairness is rarely going to be seen. Again, because we live in a broken, sinful world. Everything's just distorted. It's just not the way that it should be. It's not the way that God designed it to be, because sin has ripped things apart. So fairness doesn't really enter the equation. It's really talking about what is right within the will of God. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about justice. What is right within the will of God. And again, God always has an eternal perspective. Now, in these verses here, like I said, they're very negative. It does talk about our sin nature a little bit. That these people who are in charge of the justice of others, they were born into sin. It talks to them being like snakes, not even listening to the snake charmers. And there's a lot that we can dig into in just these 5 verses. But we're going to save a little bit of that for throughout the week and actually for chapel on Friday as well. I really hope your teachers will talk about these verses during devotions throughout the week so we can dig a little bit deeper. We can really understand what injustice is so that as we move on to next week, when we contrast that with God being a just God, we can really see that contrast between human injustice and God's justice. All right? Like I said, we'll talk about this more in chapel on Friday. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. I will see you guys around campus. God bless.